Phil Collins' health update is more serious and ultimately more hopeful than a headline about a hospital bedside might suggest. In a newly published interview, the 75-year-old Genesis singer said all 5 of his children were summoned to a Swiss hospital in April 2024 while he was unconscious and experiencing organ failure following heavy alcohol use. The crisis happened more than 2 years ago, but Collins is only now describing the moment in detail. The central question is what changed after his family arrived and where his health and sobriety stand today. For verified entertainment updates without the rumors, subscribe to Startline Entertainment. The newest account does not describe a current hospitalization. Instead, Collins is looking back on a period when his kidneys were failing, other organs were shutting down, and his longtime manager believed his children needed to come immediately. According to Collins, discussions were taking place about whether life support should continue. He said he has no memory of his children arriving because he was unconscious and did not understand how critical his condition had become. Those 5 children are Jolie, Simon, Lily, Nicholas, often known as Nick, and Matthew Collins. Public attention frequently centers on Lily because of her acting career, and on Nick because he later played drums beside his father on tour. But Collins' account makes clear that this was not a meeting involving only the most publicly recognizable members of the family. His manager contacted all 5 because the possibility existed that they might not see their father conscious again. The detail that matters most is also the one that requires the greatest care. Collins described the situation in his own words, but the reviewed reporting does not include his private medical records, a statement from the Swiss hospital, or independent comments from the doctors who treated him. The verified public fact is that Collins himself has now described a potentially fatal alcohol-related crisis. The precise medical decisions being considered are known publicly through his recollection, not through a hospital announcement. The timeline appears to have started months before his children were called. According to the newly published account, Collins was hospitalized in connection with his alcohol use in November 2023. He was discharged shortly before Christmas, but returned to intensive care weeks later. The treatment period ultimately extended across approximately 7 months, with the most critical moment described as occurring in April 2024. Collins said he was fortunate to survive and has not consumed alcohol since. That statement is consistent with an earlier interview released in January 2026, when he said he had reached roughly 2 years of sobriety. Together, the interviews place the beginning of his current sober period around the time of the late 2023 and 2024 hospitalizations, although the exact sobriety date has not been independently documented. To understand how the crisis developed, it is important to separate Collins' addiction history from assumptions about his entire music career. Collins has said that he did not develop alcoholism during Genesis' most commercially intense years. In his autobiography and later interviews, he described the problem as emerging much later, after retirement left him with long periods of isolation, and after the end of his 3rd marriage created what he experienced as a major emotional void. That is Collins' explanation of his own behavior, not an outside diagnosis of his motives. He had already written publicly about drinking alone, entering treatment, and continuing to drink despite serious medical warnings. In a separate July 2026 interview, Collins recalled being encouraged by Eric Clapton to enter the Crossroads Center in Antigua. He said he left before completing the planned stay because of a professional commitment and drank again despite receiving a direct warning about the danger. That earlier history adds context to why the 2024 hospitalization was not an isolated event. But the new disclosure changes the public understanding of how close the consequences came to becoming irreversible. Previous interviews had established that drinking affected his kidneys and contributed to years of medical complications. What the August interview adds is the image of his children being called together while he was unable to participate in the decisions or even recognize that they were present. Collins said his children feared they would never speak with him again. He did not describe a dramatic bedside conversation because, by his account, he was unconscious and remembers none of it. That absence is part of what gives the story its emotional weight. The gathering was meaningful to his family, but Collins only learned and understood its full significance later. Months after the most critical stage, the family was able to meet under very different circumstances. Collins said they spent 4 days together at the Mandarin Oriental in Knightsbridge, London, around the end of 2024. Instead of gathering in a hospital around medical uncertainty, They ate, talked, laughed, and processed what had happened. Collins described the reunion as an extraordinary experience. He also recalled Lily sitting beside him in tears and expressing that she had not expected to have that time with him. That statement should not be expanded into assumptions about every part of their private relationship. What it does confirm is that the 2024 crisis changed how at least some members of the family viewed the time they still had together. No separate statements from all 5 children were located in the credible public sources reviewed for this report. The family's experience is therefore being described primarily through Collins' interview. It would be inaccurate to assign thoughts, forgiveness, or reconciliation to any child beyond what Collins publicly recounted. The confirmed development is that they came to the hospital and later spent several days together as a family. The medical crisis also unfolded against a much longer history of physical problems. Collins sustained a spinal injury during the 2007 Genesis reunion period, and complications left him with lasting nerve damage that affected his hands and his ability to play drums. He later underwent multiple knee operations and has required assistance with mobility. Those conditions existed independently of the alcohol-related kidney problems, even though several health challenges eventually converged. In his January 2026 conversation with Zoe Ball, Collins said he had undergone 5 knee procedures before reaching a point where he could walk with assistance. He also discussed developing COVID-19 while hospitalized and said his kidneys had deteriorated after he had been drinking too much. He revealed that a live-in nurse was providing round-the-clock support, including helping him manage his medication properly. That medical support should not automatically be interpreted as evidence that Collins is presently near death. 24-hour care can reflect medication management, limited mobility, and the combined effects of several chronic conditions. The available sources do not describe a new emergency in August 2026. They describe a patient who remains medically vulnerable but who says he is sober, supported, and in better condition than during the crisis. A later update in May added another important part of the current picture. Collins said he was healthier than he had been for quite some time. He did not claim to have recovered completely, and he acknowledged that a return to regular live performance appeared unlikely. But he also stopped short of announcing that he would never make music again. Collins said he had unfinished lyrics, partial songs, and completed ideas that could give him a reason to return to his home studio. His answer was tentative rather than promotional. There was no new album announcement, release date, or confirmed recording session. The significance was that a musician who had spent years discussing physical limitations was once again willing to contemplate creating something. His relationship with performing remains more complicated. Collins has not appeared in a full live concert since Genesis completed its final tour in March 2022. Because he could no longer handle the physical demands of drumming, his son Nick played the kit while Collins performed vocals, often seated. That arrangement turned a painful professional limitation into a visible connection between father and son. Collins later explained that he was not prepared to perform at his 2026 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. He said a major appearance would require rehearsing and rebuilding his voice to a professional standard, and he did not believe he was ready to make that commitment. Declining the performance was therefore not the same as declining the honor. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has officially selected Collins for induction as a solo performer. The ceremony is scheduled for November 14, 2026, in Los Angeles. He was previously inducted with Genesis in 2010, but the new honor recognizes a solo catalog that the organization credits as part of a career involving more than 150 million records sold across his solo work and Genesis. That timing is one reason his new interview carries additional weight. Collins is approaching a major public celebration of his music while describing a private period when survival, not career recognition, was the immediate concern. The contrast is not evidence of a planned comeback, but it does explain why questions about his health, family, and future are converging now. There is also a major difference between discussing recovery and presenting recovery as complete. Collins still has mobility limitations, still receives extensive nursing support, and is not committed to touring. His statement that he is healthier than before is encouraging, but it is relative to an exceptionally severe period involving hospitalization, kidney problems, and multiple surgeries. The same caution applies to sobriety. Collins says he has not had a drink since the crisis and described himself earlier this year as 2 years sober. That is a meaningful and publicly stated update. It should not be turned into a guarantee about the future, nor should his previous relapses be used to undermine what he reports about his current condition. Recovery is better described as an ongoing status than a completed chapter. The public response to the newest disclosure is still developing because the interview has only just been published. As of this review, there was no newly released statement from Colin's representative correcting his account, and no public response from all 5 children addressing the hospital gathering. Social media interpretations should not be substituted for those absent statements. The Startline takeaway is that this story is not primarily about a celebrity making a dramatic confession. It is about a family being forced to confront a possible ending, followed by the much less cinematic work of hospitalization, sobriety, medical support, and rebuilding time together. The critical moment occurred in 2024. The reason it matters now is that Collins has finally provided a fuller account while cautiously discussing a future that once seemed uncertain. Viewers should not assume that every family wound has been healed, that Collins is physically recovered, or that new music is guaranteed. None of those conclusions is supported by the public record. What has changed is that he survived, says he stopped drinking, reunited with his children outside the hospital, and has begun entertaining the possibility of returning to his studio. The verified summary is this. Collins says he was unconscious in a Swiss hospital in April 2024 when his manager called his 5 children because his organs were failing and serious decisions might be required. He later spent time with the family in London, says he has remained sober, and continues to receive 24-hour medical support. In May, he described himself as healthier than he had been for some time, although he still declined to perform at his upcoming Rock Hall induction. What remains unresolved is whether Collins will eventually record the unfinished material he has discussed, how much his mobility can improve, and whether he will make a public appearance at the November ceremony. For now, the most important update is not that 5 children once arrived expecting the worst. It is that their father survived long enough to remember what came afterward.